All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast featuring your host, Philip Wells. And again, the is an acronym that stands for Therapy Helps Everyone. And today I have an amazing guest on the show today, Adrian Cole. He's someone that I met actually simply just through an email. And, we'll get through all of that a little bit later, but he sent out a blast email about this community that he was building. And I thought it was cool. I thought it was something that I could benefit from, and I joined it, and it led to me meeting a ton of other entrepreneurs and also other people that are in the tech space. Now, with Therapy Helps Everyone, I also want to make sure people know that it's not just therapy, but it's also mental health, right? Psychology, thoughts, feelings, emotions, the whole shebang. So it's not just about therapy, sitting one-on-one with a therapist, but it's about those emotions that maybe that we're feeling, or maybe it's some of those thoughts or the psychology behind why we do things, so on and so forth. So I definitely want to make that distinction. So before we go, I just want to introduce Adrian. He is the founder of a technological startup called Voiceblast. Voiceblast is one of the easiest ways for a podcast creator to discover, connect, and engage with their most dedicated listeners using short voice messages. He is currently also in the second batch of the Mozilla Foundation, the Fix the Internet Accelerator, where they hope to produce the next generation of internet companies that serve society with useful, safe, and innovative products. Now, Adrian, I want to give you a moment to fully introduce yourself. If I missed anything, I want to give you an opportunity to clarify and fully tell the people who you are.
Hey, look, I think you got that pretty well, man. So I'm Adrian. I think the part that maybe you missed is I'm an engineer and a founder, a community builder myself. Obviously, I live in South Florida with you. And I really love technology. I love innovation. I love startups. And I love working with people as well. So I found a way to turn my passion of not just creating products, but bringing people together. And I'm turning that into my life's work through Voiceblast.
Gotcha. And if you don't mind, tell us how you got started in the engineering field, but then also getting into this idea of creating startups and communities.
Oh man! Well, I studied to be an engineer, and I was really good at math. So there's this one story that I'll tell you. So I think I was about 12. I was doing this math exam. I can't remember where it was or how important. I think the exam was pretty important, and there was this thing of getting full marks and full grades,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was in this exam and I was done, right? I'd completed everything in about half an hour. It's usually about a 2-hour exam. And I'm sitting there. One question didn't have the answer that I had figured out. Like it was sort of an MCQ situation, A, B, C, D, E. And I'm like, man, my answer is not on this. And I sat there for about an hour recalculating this one problem over and over and over and over again. And then eventually I got to the conclusion that the question was wrong. Um,
Wow.
and yeah. So I decided that the question was wrong, and I wrote a note to the examiner. I said, I think this is wrong, right? I think you made a mistake here, but here's my answer. And I put down an F, circled it, and put my answer down. And when the grades came back, I had full scores. So that means I was right. And and since then it was just a matter of how do I use this mathematical ability, this analytical mind that I have. And engineering was probably the most natural thing that parents were like, okay, that's a good field to go into. It's sort of the big four, the big five, or whatever it's called. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I ended up being an engineer. But to get into the product development side, that was sort of later on that I realized that the point of being an engineer is to make stuff. And I realized towards my last year of college that I really enjoyed doing that. And since then, I've just been making stuff.
Gotcha. Man, that's amazing. Like, I don't think I've ever heard anything like that. Maybe I have, but it's just been on TV shows. So yeah, that's cool, man. That's dope. And there's something that I think we almost glazed over. Your background, like where you're from, is rather unique, right? Like you have, a different like upbringing from people in the States. Like, if you don't mind kind of telling us, like, where you're from,
Right.
originally, so on and so forth.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I was born in London, and my family had so I have a lot of family across the world. So I was born in London. My family is originally from West Africa, Sierra Leone, and I kind of grew up between Sierra Leone, spending time in London with my family, and Chicago here in the States. And over the years, the past 10, 15 years, I've just bounced in between the three. And I actually did my college in South Africa. Actually, I was there for 4 years. I studied there, and I actually stayed and worked as an engineer for a number of years. But right throughout all this, I've sort of been traveling around and just hopping around from country to country, doing a lot of different things.
Gotcha. And while we're at it, can you tell us, like, what the tech scene is like in Africa specifically, whether it's Southwest, so on and so forth?
I'm going to be honest. I don't particularly know.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really focused on technology when I was there. I was
Mm-hmm.
more. So I worked in like hard engineering is what I would call it. So I worked in
Mm-hmm.
product development. I was the engine developer, and I worked in various different products. I worked in the aerospace industry. So I wasn't really there for when I really got interested in tech. It was towards the later end, when I was
Mm-hmm.
leaving to come back here with my wife, is when I sort of focus on technology. So I know it's booming. It's very hard to ignore it because there's
Mm-hmm.
just so many problems to fix over there that it would eventually grow. Now, I'm not sure, for technology to grow, you need funding. You need an environment where entrepreneurs are encouraged to build stuff and not sort of cast away or look down upon if they fail. I think that culture might not exist there just quite yet, but you can't ignore it for sure. It's definitely going to be the next place where a lot of huge companies are going to come out of. Whether or not it's soon, that's up for debate.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for telling us about that, man. So speaking of tech, man, I kind of want to jump into it, and I want you to kind of tell us about this startup that you've created, and we talked a little bit about it off air, and it's called Voiceblast. And
Right.
I want you to tell the listeners what Voiceblast truly is.
Right. So, as a podcast creator, so the problem actually for me, I discovered it when I actually started my podcast. And I realized that I had a number of people that were tuning into my show, and you can see it on the dashboard of whatever hosting provider. For a hosting provider, just means where you put your podcast. You know that. And I would see the numbers go up every time I released a show, 30 people, 40 people. And people will spend an hour listening to my entire show. Now, I don't know about you, but people spend 2 seconds watching the image on Instagram. And you have people sitting down there for about an hour listening to me talk to someone else. And that was pretty powerful. My wife loves me, but she doesn't listen to me past 5 minutes, bro.
Gotcha.
So to have people tuning in for an hour, I thought that was really amazing. So the next step was, how do I connect with these people? And that's where the brick wall came. So like, you have this amazing content medium that 100 million people tune into every month, and there's a huge wall between the creators and the community of people that actually consume the content. Now, you can say, okay, well, people can follow you on Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that, but those are very different platforms. It's very hard to connect with people on there because the algorithm chooses who sees your content, and you sort of left to the culture of whatever platform that you launch. So what I decided to build was this platform that allowed creators, primarily podcasters, to build their communities and bring people together. I think it's very unique. It's a very unique ability that podcasters have, in that you're able to pull and discover like-minded people through the internet, and that is super strong and super powerful. And I think that the final stage of this medium is to pull people together and actually create these communities, because the communities already exist, right?
Hmm.
Your listeners have a relationship with you, right?
Hmm.
They listen
Hmm.
to you. Now we're just giving people the ability to actually share this space together. And the way that we're unique is that it's only voice, right? So there's no
Mm.
text, there's no images, there's no video. It's just people having conversations. So we have a web app that we launched as an MVP, and now we're working on the mobile app, which will be coming out in about 2 or 3 weeks or so.
Oh, wow. Nice, nice. And before we forget, can you tell the listeners where they can find Voiceblast if they want to use it?
Right. So right now we're in private beta,
Hmm.
which is a fancy term for meaning that we don't let everybody use it just quite yet.
Okay.
But if you go to voiceblast.fm and you actually submit invitation, you actually we have to invite you in to the platform. So voiceblast.fm, go there, check it out. You can actually sign up. Just give us your email and a reason as to why you want to use the product, and I'll get in touch with you afterwards.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Nice, nice. Now, before that, there was one word that you kept using, or kind of like a synonym of words that you kept using while you described your your company, this app that you're building, and that was togetherness, right? Community,
Mhm.
right? And that part I think is so important because I think it gets glazed over. I think obviously Facebook, Instagram has done a great job of bringing communities together, right? But I think that aspect is something that we can't overlook when developing startups, right? Whether it be a community or it be some type of app, because this is the psychology part. At the end of the day, people love to feel connected. People
Mhm.
love to be loved, and people love to give love, right? And
Right.
that's what I learned on my end. And it sounds like your app, your startup, is focusing on bringing those communities together because, as you mentioned, they're all over the world, but there isn't really too many places where they can be brought together specifically. And it seems like Voice Blast is going to be that way for that to happen.
Yeah, so I think that when you think about community, it's really just people with shared interest. And everybody wants to be heard, right? People have things to say, they have stories to tell, they have things to share. And community is important because without it we die, right? We quite
Mm,
literally die as human beings. We don't function very well without that social element. And like you said, Instagram, Facebook, all these huge platforms have done a great job of bringing people together on this one platform. But if you think about these platforms, they're really a collection of smaller communities, right? That
mm,
really cannot have their own space just quite yet because that's not how the monetization model works. So the incentives are different, right? So if you think about hashtags, right? People are building communities on hashtags. That's why they're so important because you can connect and communicate with people using hashtags. Well, what we're saying is that well, that was the 1.0 version of social networking, which is fine. It's worked well. It served us. It's great. But now let's get to the 2.0 is where now you take that community of people that you've built on these platforms and you pull them into a space where you can actually engage with them and actually have conversations, right? Like you can see it happening when people are commenting and stuff. Like they want to talk. That discussion wants to go on, but the way it's happening right now, it's not very personal. So going voice only unlocks a new layer of how we communicate on the internet. And I think it's super exciting to see how that's going to play out.
definitely, definitely, man. That's awesome, man. And that's something in that I would definitely love to get in on. So, after this show, we'll definitely kind of talk a little bit more about
Oh
that. How
yeah,
I can
definitely. We'll get you on the beta list.
Gotcha, gotcha. Appreciate it. So let's take it back a little bit for our listeners. There may be some people out there who hear this term startups and maybe they know about it, maybe they don't. I always try to like to kind of give them, that elementary version of the show at first. So can you tell them what a tech startup is? And then we'll start to go into like, okay, how do we begin that process? So just what is a tech startup?
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's a lot of definitions out there, but the simplest one is that as a company, it's a new company, right? So it has to be new for it to be a
Hmm.
startup that is solving a unique problem, right? Or it's solving a problem in a unique way. And it's serving a lot more people than a traditional service business would. Um, and the technology component of that means that you can scale. So startups are really just businesses that can really scale. So you think about a service-based business, you can serve, 20, 30, 40 people at the most if you have something sort of like a design agency, or even as you as a therapist, you're doing 30, 40 people, and that would be like your max that you can ever handle. But if you, as Philip, built a tech startup where you built some AI that can take over the function of therapy, you can now serve 1 million people. It's endless. You can serve the whole world if the product is that great. And think about Facebook with like almost 2 billion people on it right now. So it's a long-winded way of saying it's just a company that solves a unique problem in a unique way that can serve a lot of people at scale.
Wow. Wow. Gotcha. And it sounds like to begin that, you have to figure out what problems can I solve. And I think as entrepreneurs, that's the way we have to think. We have to think, okay, what is the end goal? How do I solve a problem? And from there, you start to find people flocking towards that solution,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, okay. Now, speaking of solving problems, I know that your podcast, right? The Grit and Grind podcast is aimed at helping and reaching out to these entrepreneurs and trying to give them some advice. And again, a community where they can kind of like gain, advice, guidance, tips, things like that to go ahead and start their own company, so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind kind of telling the listeners, what the Grit and Grind podcast is, if I missed it, and feel free to tell them where to find it, because I think that's a great resource for them.
Yeah, so I'm a huge podcast fan. I've tuned into your show. I listen to a bunch of different podcasts, and I think about in 2019, I was listening to this one show. Well, surprise, surprise, about startups. And I remember the host. I love this show, and I would never see Black founders on being interviewed. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I was okay with it. It's like it's whatever. You can't really dictate to a host who they interview, right? But some diversity is good.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember this one episode, he mentioned that, hey, I can't find Black founders to interview. And I'm like, man, I almost choked on what I was sipping on. I'm like, I could count, hundreds. I have access to so many Black founders. I had lots of founder friends. I'm like, what is this guy talking about? So I think for me, that was like the tipping point of like, okay, I think I'm ready to go out there and create my own show. But at the same time, I had these things called founder calls, where me and one of my founder friends will jump on a call and we'll talk for maybe an hour and a half and just help each other out, give each other advice, be sort of a sounding board at the same time. And those calls were getting better and better and better every time, to the point where at the end of them, we'll be like, man, we should have recorded that because that was really good. So that combined with this being annoyed, actually, just being annoyed that I can't believe that someone would say that, was sort of the tipping point for me to actually go out there and create my own show. And what I do is I really just sit down with other Black founders, and first of all, I look for interesting companies that are outside of the norm. People really doing amazing things that I find interesting. And we sit down and we just talk about how they got it started. I think that companies don't die in business. They die in the shower, where you think yourself and talk yourself out of it. So my goal is to take people from that idea phase and just saying that you can launch something. And by the way, here's people that look like you, that share your lived experience, which is very important, because you can see, it's no secret that white males are overrepresented in the technology space. Every company that you've ever heard of, when you look at the founder, is probably a white male. And so sometimes people don't see themselves in that position. And if you don't see yourself there, you can't imagine yourself there. So what I'm trying to do is make sure that I resurface and surface these entrepreneurs doing amazing things that look like people from my community, and tell their story, and sort of humanize the process a little bit more and make it more accessible to folks in our community, and saying, hey, you can go out there and build a technology company, even if you're not a computer science major, even if you're not a software engineer, you can build technology. These are the tools, and here they are.
Wow. That's so valuable, right? Especially in this age of 2020, for anyone that's, following the stock market, the one thing that leads all stocks and basically drives the stock market is tech, that being Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, so on and so forth, all the FANG stocks. So like, there is so much power in technology, but as you mentioned, it's like trying to penetrate that space where a lot of people of color are finding issues. Right.
Yeah. So I just want to jump in here for a second. So like, we live in a broken world, man. Like, there's so much wrong with everything that we do. There's so much friction. If you think about some of the basic things that you do every day, like you've trained yourself to be okay with just mediocrity of how things run, right? So there's so many problems out there and there's so many things to improve. And technology as a layer, as a tool, will solve some of these problems. So there's endless amounts of problems out there. There's endless amounts of opportunity out there. And you don't necessarily, so in a weird way, like you just said that it's not necessarily accessible to our community. Um, Unfortunately, everything is at this point,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
everything's on the web. This is the first time in human history that you can click a few buttons and get any piece of information that you want. What's
Gotcha.
stopping us is the will and the motivation to go out there and seek this knowledge, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that barrier is almost even, it's worse than not having access to the information itself, because people are focused on other things and not on the things that potentially could change the world. And so the barrier now is reaching across to people and making them aware of what's possible. The information is there, it's everywhere. Now there's a funding issue, which we can talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But to get started, there's enough out there for you to get going.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So basically, you're saying even if the information was kind of brought to the listeners, right? Like there's something that's still kind of like stopping them, that mental roadblock is what it sounds like. And I was going to actually touch on that next. There's something more than just that accessibility that's kind of preventing them from like, okay, like acting on it. And as you mentioned, it's kind of like that will, it's that motivation, the thoughts of, hey, I can actually do this, right? So on and so forth. So I want to ask you, because I've listened to your show as well, and a few of your a few of your guests have spoke about some of the roadblocks that they've run into. And I want you to kind of touch on some of the mental roadblocks that some of them have encountered, right? Because I'm assuming there may be a theme. So if you could kind of touch on that and kind of, tell them like, or tell the listeners, how have they made it through some of these roadblocks?
Man, I think that we're going to assume that a lot of the folks that are tuned in might be at the start of their journey. And maybe this is, some of my guests might have touched on this, but I'm going to, for sure, is when you start something new that is foreign to the people around you and your family, a lot of times what people will want to do is they want to get validation from their friends and family, right? Um, and that's where the ideas die. Immediately they die there, because your mom doesn't really, I mean, she loves you, but she doesn't know about technology or innovation as much as you do, or she doesn't care about it, right? And so we seek validation in the people around us. And sometimes when we don't get that, that's the first roadblock. It's okay, well, how do I get people around me to understand what I'm doing? Chances are they never are, right? So you have to go seek the communities of people who are similar to you, who are building stuff just like you are. The next roadblock is bringing people along for the journey. So we have this habit of, we want to start a business. We look around us, we say, okay, who do I know in my family or my friendship circle that wants to join me? Let's go start a business. And another big roadblock, because that's a lot of things die that way. People don't get along. There's always someone that works harder than someone else. So that's just one of a huge roadblock there. But whilst you're going through all this, is you're really seeking validation. And I think that what a lot of people get wrong is that they should be seeking validation from their customers, the people that is going to buy what they're building, right? Those are the people that care. Your mom doesn't care about your little startup. I mean, she loves you, but she doesn't care, right? Your friends, man, that's a great idea. I mean, some of my friends don't even know what I build, right? They don't, it's like, they just know I'm doing something in tech and they'll support me when I call up on them, right? So I think that the first roadblock is getting outside of your comfort zone, outside of your circle, outside of your community, and actually going out there and finding people. And I think that a lot of people never cross that barrier. They just know the same people that they've always known, and they're not exposing themselves to new communities and new people. And I think that if it's anything that you do, you have to break past these barriers. And I think that this is where social networks have sort of been sort of a huge tool. but unfortunately people still calcify themselves in like these smaller communities of people that they're familiar with, and they never really break past that barrier. So they never really get things actually launched, because it's lonely. Like doing a startup is probably one of the loneliest things you'd ever do. The loneliest things you'll ever do. And if you don't really believe in what you're building and have a vision for it, there's this period of moving from idea to actually getting the first product built or whatever the case may be, where it's really just you. You know, you might be working with people, but you're keeping this entire thing alive. And if you're not sure about what you're building and don't have a clear idea of where you want to go, you're probably just going to fall right down and just like stop eventually because it's too freaking hard to continue.
Gotcha. You know, in your first episode, I want to say there's a young lady that you were speaking to, and she spoke about trying to find people to essentially work for free, and like that's the tough part about tech startups. Like,
Oh man, it's
no one is right. Like, no one is getting paid during the tech startup. A lot of people are working their other jobs. You know,
yeah.
so like that's obviously like a barrier, trying to find people to be bought into the mission, right?
Yeah, so it's the hardest thing to do, to convince other people to work for you or work with you and join you for free. Um because a lot of it is just based on the team. Even investors, right? When they sort of analyze a startup, they look at the idea, but they're really interested in looking at the team. So okay, well, who's building this stuff? What is this team like? And it's super hard. And I think it's harder for us as Black founders because not a lot of people are aware of what's going on in sort of the startup world. And people don't necessarily know, right? They're not familiar with it. They don't know a lot of people who have built startups, right? They don't understand it just quite yet. Um, so finding people is a lot harder because the truth is the people that have the talent, and I'll go back and I'll keep saying talent because you need talent, not just skill, but talent, like someone that's amazing at doing something. But unfortunately, the people who are amazing at doing some of the things that you need to build your startup, they're getting paid $250,000, 150K at other tech startups, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they don't necessarily want to scrum it with you, doing your little startup that's not making any cash just quite yet. So that part is a huge journey. And the truth is, man, you just have to network your AWS off. You have to really put yourself out there. But I would say more importantly is you have to get going by yourself, right? I didn't have anybody I was working with, but I eventually built my MVP. I built my first product. Through grit and through grind, I just like got it done. But then once I was able to do that, people can see it, they can touch it, they can feel it. They go, "Oh, okay, so now I see what you're building. It's interesting." Now, because there's a huge element of FOMO here as well, right? Like it's like, okay, if I see this product and I can see, oh shit, I think this thing might actually take off. I want to be a part of it. But if you don't have that and you're just walking around with an idea, no one's going to pay you any attention.
Yeah, that's exactly how the stock market reacts, right? Like no one wanted to invest in Amazon when it was like in the year 2000, right? When it hit 20, 17, 18, 19, and even now, everybody's like, yo, like, how do I get on Amazon, or how do I get on the next Amazon, which some people are probably
Right.
saying is, Alibaba and things like that. How do I get on into the next Tesla? And some people are probably saying, oh, it's Neo, right? Like you have to get in, you know, at this stage and believe in the mission, essentially, and that's what it sounds like what you're saying, and trying to build it through grit and grind, pun intended, you know, is a process that you have to go through, and it can be a very tough process. So, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you really have to sell a vision of a future that's compelling,
Mm.
and you have to sell. I can't remember who I can attribute to this, but the saying goes, startups are you build the future and you pull the present towards it, right?
Ooh, wow.
So you're standing somewhere that nobody is at. Ideally, if you're going from 0 to 1, which means you're creating something new from scratch or whatever, um, you're gonna go ahead and build that thing, right? And it's your job to pull society towards that solution. Um, whether it be it business to business or business to consumer products or enterprise or software as a service, whatever the case may be. You're building something new, you got to pull people towards it. So if you can sell that vision of what you're building to somebody else and they can see it and they can realize that there's no other way, but the world will eventually need this product, then I think you have a greater chance of getting talented people to join your team.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Can you say that one more time? The idea of bringing the future to the
Okay,
present. That
cool.
was, yeah, that was so cool.
Yeah. So like you have to build the future and pull the present towards it.
That's deep. That's deep. Yo, I like that, man. So I want to go back and because there's a lot of gems that you drop, but I also love for people to kind of hear your story. And we talked about that invalidation piece or seeking validation. Some of these other roadblocks, so on and so forth. But I want to stick to that validation part.
Mm-hmm.
Like for you, how did you break through that wall to gain that confidence to build something like Voiceblast?
Yeah. So the truth is I've pivoted about 4 or 5 times. Now, a pivot in startup world just means that you sort of change direction, which is similar to basketball. You pivot and then you move the other direction. So it's really been iterating time and time and time and time and time again. Very funny enough, but like the initial product that I built was actually a social network for entrepreneurs. And that didn't take off at all. And it's funny because to tie it into our community, I don't think a lot of people know this, but when I launched the BME community, which is where we met, as the offline events, those were amazing. Like those took off immediately. I had built the online version of that first, right? And nobody used it, right? and and I was like, you know what? Let me try offline. And it turns out that the solution was actually the offline solution. That's what people wanted. They wanted to share space. They wanted to meet people. They wanted to have drinks and listen to music and have fun. So I guess the lesson that I learned from that first product was that the solution is not always a tech one, right? So you could go out there and want to build something, but it might be something completely different. That might be the solution. So, but what was really important was that I still kept on iterating. I kept on iterating on this product, and over time, I wanted to solve my own problems and build things for myself, right? And that's what I eventually focused on. It's like, okay, well, how do I make this thing for me? If this is valuable for me, it's going to be valuable for other people. And through that process, I just continue to iterate. And it's like, okay, well, I'm a podcaster, so it will be really cool if I can host my podcast on this platform too. So other people that I can network with can see that I have a show. And at some point during that process of thinking about that, I was like, wait, I haven't seen that before. So I looked around and I said, this doesn't exist. But more importantly, I had learned that when you have ideas, the best thing to do is to go speak to people who potentially could be using your product. So don't go hide in a room and build something for 6 months and then come out and say it's ready. It's the first thing is to talk to people. So I spent about 2 weeks and I spoke to probably about 24 podcasters for about an hour each and just validating this idea. So I have my thesis, which means that my version of what I think this problem really is. And I'm going to go interview a bunch of people now and either confirm that there's life here or there's not. And at the end of that process, I realized that there was a huge opportunity here to sort of bridge the gap between podcasters and listeners, which then was where I started off. And all throughout this process, I'm iterating the product. I'm just changing it ever so slightly, modifying it until we got to the point where I realized that, okay, so this is what we need to build. And then I got accepted into a startup accelerator by the Mozilla Foundation. And they've funded companies like Firefox and WordPress. And the accelerator is really about building a better internet for everybody. And the story that I told about bringing creators and their communities together resonated. And I got into that, and I was able to have some amazing mentors who believed in my idea and my vision, and I worked tirelessly with them to actually take the product from where it was into something that was way better. And again, the most important thing that I can probably say about this process was that it was very small steps, right? There was no point where I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a huge jump. It was just iterating, talking to people, analyzing feedback, and just fine tuning that product until you actually get to something that makes sense and people will actually enjoy to use.
Wow. Wow. As you were explaining that, you use the word pivot, you use the word modify, and things like that. I think a lot of listeners may not understand. Some people may see that as maybe like a potential setback,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I like the way you use the word pivot versus the word setback. And I think that goes to the mindset that you have. There's this idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset,
Right.
right? Every failure is an opportunity versus the extent of my abilities. And you saw every one of those pivots as a way to, okay, let me try to figure out how can I modify this product to be one that the listeners, right, will want to use. And I think that's great to emphasize.
Yeah. So I think that they look, I'm saying that they're pivots. But what I'm not saying is that they're very emotional situations to go through.
Mm,
Imagine working on something super hard, going down 100 miles an hour, and you realize, shit, it's not working. Okay, why is it not working? Right. And it's never the customer, it's always the product. Right. So you say,
mm,
oh, this customer doesn't know what they're doing. No, no, no. It's you, it's your product, it's your service. And taking the analytical approach of, okay, why is it not working? Right. I think the best thing that I was able to do was put my ego aside and
mm,
say, okay, you have to be humble, man, because if not, it will humble you, right? So I
mm-hmm,
think that once I realized that, okay, ego aside, focus on the problem, focus on the solution, you're able to make these smaller changes. And again, it goes back to what we spoke about, I think offline before we got on, was you have to solve a problem that you personally have, which is the best, because then you
mm-hmm,
know that if you don't solve it, you still have that problem, right? And you understand that problem very near and dear. But it's also something that you enjoy, right? So for me, when I get to a roadblock, it's like, okay, this is fun. Let's figure out why it's not working. Let's test things. You're really a scientist. Um, but it's really ugly, man. Unfortunately, it's very ugly. That process is not very pretty. It's the stories are told like it's pretty, but the actual process itself is very ugly. You would look at yourself in the mirror some days and say, what the hell am I doing? Like, this is not working. And at some point, something's going to click and it's going to start working. But the
mm.
truth is, 90% of the time, it doesn't work, right? So 90% of startups actually fail, done, go to zero, no one cares. But you still have to believe that you're in the 10%.
Definitely. You know, when I speak in my therapy sessions to my clients, they always have this goal that they're trying to reach, right? Someone may
Mm-hmm.
say, I want to start my own business, or I want to do public speaking, so on and so forth. And one question I do not think they ask themselves a lot, but I make sure I ask them is like, why? Why do you want to start a business? Like, what does that give you? What does that do for you? Because you're
Right.
probably working a decent 9 to 5. You may be
Yeah.
making $70,000, $100,000. Like, why do you need this entrepreneurship under your belt? Why do you need to create a startup, right? A tech company, so on and so forth. And that question normally stumps them, and it stumps them so bad that I have to ask it twice. Like, why? Like, I hear everything that she's saying,
Right.
but why is this important to you? And what I'm trying to get at is their values.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
is it that they value?
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell with you that you value community, you value entrepreneurship, you value, XYZ. And that is what pushes you through those 4 or 5 pivots, as you mentioned. And that is so important. Like, you have to ask yourself, like, why am I creating this tech startup? Why am I creating this community? What is it that
Mm-hmm.
I value? Because that's what's going to get you up at 5 a.m. That's what's going to keep you up at, midnight, 1 a.m., so on and so forth. So
Mhm.
you really have to step back and reflect on what is your values. And a lot of tech startups, they try to build their companies based on values, right? And
Right.
that's how you connect with people,
Mhm.
right? Like I think that piece is so important. You got to have some type of value system underneath yourself as a tech startup, so on and so forth, but also the product itself. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so I think that I think for me when I think about look, I think a lot of founders they just they're just machines, they're just going, right?
mhm,
And we don't spend a lot of time thinking about why we're doing it. We know why we're doing it, but we don't necessarily always think about it. Um I think part of me is I'm pushing the limit. I enjoy to push the limit every time. You know, BME, the community that I started in South Florida, the first meetup was 3 people.
mm.
It was at a Panera Bread. And the one guy wasn't even black. He was just my homie, man. He was just like there to hang out.
Gotcha.
Um, and for me, it was like, okay, where can this go? Right? Where can we take this? And a part of me loves a good challenge. Um, but on the other side, I think that the most important thing that we can do as human beings is to unlock our true creativity, right?
Mm,
And entrepreneurship is a vehicle to get to that point. If you think about it, entrepreneurship is a modern day pilgrimage, right? When you embark on that journey, you're going to discover a lot of things about yourself, the things that you probably never knew before. And through that journey, you're going to realize what your skills are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses, and it's going to expose a lot of things that you never really thought possible. You're going to look at yourself at some point and be like, okay, wow, okay, who is this person? So for me, it's really about discovering your true. We're all creative beings, man. Like we're all creators. Like we are builders, right? And we all have skills, and you can build anything you want right now, right? So
mhm,
for me, starting the business is just that starting point of kickstarting that creative journey. You might find that the business itself might fall away. You might end up doing something else, but that's how you ignite it in the modern world. You say, okay, I'm going to go build a company. It's a thing. Because the truth is, when you think about a company, and again, I can't remember where I got this one. It could have been from a book, but a business, right, is a construct, right?
mhm,
It's a group of people with a shared understanding of how they're going to work and share information, right?
mhm,
You just built a community of people with a value and organization and information sharing and a work and money. And so when you're doing that, you're going to have to pull every single skill out of your body to get that done. Right. So for me, it's really the act of creation and creating something new, discovering something about yourself. I'll tell you a story now. Okay. So
mhm,
when I decided that Voiceblast had to move out from being a website to a mobile app, I met up with a designer, and at the time I couldn't. I have a great eye, and the way I discovered I can explain this is more of like taste. I have great taste in what I see and what I do, and how I present things, but I couldn't really design mobile apps, right?
mhm,
So we had this session, and I brainstormed, and I sort of told this person everything that I wanted to go into the app, and I had some sketches that I had created, and that was the end of that. They were supposed to get back to me the next day, and they didn't. And I'm lying in bed that night, and the ideas are just flowing in my head. And I just got up and I said, I'm gonna design this thing right now. So I got up, fired my computer up, and I actually started designing it on Canva.
mm,
Well, behold, I'm actually a natural at doing that,
mhm.
right?
I can
So in
attest.
in a matter of weeks, I go from never designing a mobile app to designing a pretty damn good app that some of my mentors would see and be like, "This is actually really good," right? And I didn't realize I had that ability. But then when I looked back, I had spent a lot of time as a product design engineer building real life products and actually designing the stuff on the computer that the reflexes were the same, right? I was tapping into the same area of my brain. So now I'm actually on track to be a really good designer, product designer, designing UI and UX and user experiences.
Hmm.
But if I didn't jump into entrepreneurship, I would never have discovered that.
Definitely, man. You do not know you have wings until you try to fly.
Until you try to
Right.
fly.
Exactly. And I don't want the listeners to get caught up in the fact that okay, he's an engineer, like he has these skills that I possibly could
Definitely
like
not.
that's not the case. Like, because there's something to be said, and we talked about this offline. There's something to be said about finding those people who are, as you mentioned, talented, right? And being able to outsource those tasks. But you have to be able to bring that future to the present, as you mentioned, right? You have to bring those two things together so
Yeah.
people can be more bought in and
Yes.
be willing to partake in the creation of this app, this website, this company, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I remember there's a gentleman, he's a founder and he's now a venture capitalist called Gary Tan. Um, and I followed him. He started a YouTube channel now as a VC. He was a founder before. He sold his company to Twitter, I believe. I think the company was called Posturus. I'm not sure, but it was a social network via email. It
Hmm.
was before my time, so I didn't really use it. But
Mm-hmm.
I followed him on YouTube, and right throughout this process of me doing all this, I was struggling to find good developers to work with me because I couldn't really afford top-notch talent. So I was kind of working with folks overseas, half doing it myself, learning along the way. It was really ugly process.
Mm-hmm.
But I reached out to him on Instagram, and I was like, I was just asking for advice. I was like, "Hey Gary, this is what I'm doing. Here's my problem." And I remember what he said. He said, "Learn enough to be dangerous."
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stuck with me since then. Is you don't have to know it all, but you can learn enough to be dangerous, right? If you're building a company and the first thing you think about is, oh, I need a marketer. Okay, you might go hire a marketer. Cool. And then next it's PR. You say, okay, well, I need someone in PR. Let me go hire that person. Let me outsource. And then after that, you'd be like, I need a graphic designer to help me with my artwork. Let me go hire that. And you broke, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, I need to develop graphics, cool. What's the easiest way to do that? There are websites you can go grab a template. All you have to do is spend a weekend on YouTube and you can learn how to use Photoshop. You can learn how to use Adobe Illustrator. Get these templates and put out some amazing graphics. You're already dangerous, right? Because now you can put good quality things out, right? So I think that the most important thing is that you learn enough to be dangerous, right? And just
Mm-hmm.
get going. You don't need a lot of people. And again, I think this is probably, I'm not sure if we touched on this before, but you have to keep the ideas and the products simple enough where you can just get started. I've spoken to so many people who have app ideas that are equivalent to Facebook. And I'm like, bro, there's about 5,000 guys writing code on Facebook every day. Like, you're not going to build that. Forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you really want to simplify these problems. You want to simplify the solutions. You want to simplify everything to the point where you can actually build something in a matter of weeks and put it out there.
Jumping off the porch. And that's something that I try to tell everyone, including myself. Just jump off the porch. Just go do it. Right. A lot of people are stuck in this planning stage and they're trying to figure things out. Things got to be perfect, so on and so forth. Nah, just jump off the porch. Like if you look at the old icons for Nike, the old logos, right? The old logos for Nike, the old logos for Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, like they've all evolved, right? So like that's proof you don't have to have it right then and there. Like if Apple would have waited to create the iPhone 12 to put out their first phone, well, they would have missed out on trillions of dollars, right?
Trillions, man. Trillions
Trillions,
of
right?
dollars.
Like just get out there and create something. And it didn't even start off with the iPhone; it started with the iPod, right? So it kind of goes to show, like, just jump off the porch, create it, and then, and I actually had someone say this on Twitter, you can build a loyal fan base by showing your development, right? If your listeners, if your users are seeing you progress and develop, that makes them more loyal to you as a consumer, right? And that's something that could be so, so valuable, right? Now, there's a funny story about how Airbnb was created, and maybe you know it, maybe you don't, but Airbnb was a group of guys who lived out in San Francisco, which is one of the highest places to live in the country. And it was just, a couple college guys who couldn't afford to pay their rent. And they found out that a convention was coming into town. I think maybe it was the Obama was coming to town, and maybe it was Bush, so on and so forth. And if they figure out that there was a problem, a lot of the hotels were taken, like it was completely booked. And San Francisco isn't but so big, which is another reason why rent and everything is so expensive. So you guys came up with an idea like, hey, let's just rent out, the living room. It wasn't even an actual room. It was just their living room. They rented it out. They put up a little curtain, and they had a few people come in and, spend like $100 a night to stay, thus bringing them in some cash flow to pay their rent, so on and so forth. And what they did to kind of spice things up, they gave them breakfast, right? They gave them breakfast with their air mattress, right? So that's how they came up with this idea of Airbnb, that air bed that they blew up in their living room, and the breakfast that they was going to serve. And from that small solution that they had, they was able to create this amazing business that everyone on this that's listening probably has used. But it came from just jumping off the porch, figuring out a solution and how to solve it. It's nothing too difficult. And I think that's kind of like so amazing to hear for anyone that's trying to create a business, a startup, so on and so forth. Just jump off the porch, figure out what problem can you solve.
Yeah, so I think that even with service-based enterprises, for people who might not necessarily be interested in technology, they just want to build a service business, there's still something to be told about, or to be said about, building a simple service. It's like people complicate things so much, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I know a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm just like, it's too complicated, man.
Mm-hmm.
Think about like everything that comes with building a product. There's support. There's tutorials. There's so much stuff to do that if the solution is too big, everything just falls apart. Even with a service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even if you're building a service-based business, just make it direct, right? Don't make it for everybody, right? For example, a very simple example would be something like, if you're a web development agency, you can focus on just building medical sites, right? We build sites for medical practitioners, and you can build a huge business just on that, right? You can say, and it's Philip Wells, I only offer therapy services to entrepreneurs, right? And because you do that, you create a very viral loop of word of mouth where entrepreneurs know each other, so they're closely clustered together. And from there, your business will just grow. But think about it, if one of your clients is a dentist, the other is an entrepreneur, and there's one person who's an athlete, now you will get business, don't get me wrong. But now if you want to differentiate yourself and stand out, and you say, I am an expert in dealing with, stress and anxiety, all the stuff that founders and entrepreneurs face, come see me, you will be an authority in that space. So in the same way, how you only build in a product that solves obviously a huge problem in a simple way, your service business should also reflect something similar, right? Build a big business and something very simple, and serve one customer.
Yeah. The last guest that I had is actually an entrepreneur's therapist. And I think it's so great that she does that. And she even breaks it down even more specifically that she doesn't only, but she markets to women entrepreneurs. And within that small space, she has a booming business.
I wouldn't call it a small space, but it's a huge space. But I get you. It's a small what might seem like a smaller demographic, a subset, but there's a lot of people who actually fit that demographic.
Actually, you're right. You are so correct in that. So I want to touch on another thing, and we was talking a little bit about Silicon Valley, and in Silicon Valley, that obviously is the tech space, so on and so forth. And I came across an article about, this guy who he helped create eBay, Skype, PayPal, so on and so forth. And his name was Salvatore T.H.E, something along those lines. And he was someone who unfortunately suffered from bipolar and depression. And people would applaud him for his ability to stay up, 12 hours, enter a spreadsheet, to work basically continuous, right? And anybody listening, if they know what bipolar is, one of the features of it is manic episodes. So you ever hear someone says, "Oh, this guy's driving like a maniac," right? Or this guy's acting like a maniac. It's these periods of a lot of energy, right? And you can see that in someone that may be working, 18 hours a day, so on and so forth. And this guy, he actually ended up taking his own life due to the depression, the bipolar, and things of that nature. So I kind of wanted to hear from you, someone that's in this tech space. Why is, depression, suicide, and things like that so high and so prevalent, not only in the entrepreneur space, but also in tech as well?
Yeah, so I think that the body has limits. And when you're building something new, and first of all, it's very hard, right? It's very challenging, and you spend a lot of time and energy in that space. Now, I think what happens is founders get sucked into their work so much, right? And you have a lot riding on it. And I think that once you get into the space where you start raising money from other people, right? You start raising these very large sums of money from investors. Now you're on the hook, right? You have to return a huge sum of money, right? And you have to do it very quickly. There's competition. It's the Olympics, man. I describe being a founder as the Olympics of business, right? Starting a service-based business is tough. Don't get me wrong. I'm not depreciating how hard it is. But starting a tech business, it's the Olympics, right? There's a lot of losers. And I think that if you go into that and you don't have systems in place where you can actually take breaks, practice self-care, spend time with family, and have a support structure, it can break down very quickly, right? And working long hours takes a toll on anybody, right? You do it. I do it. I mean, you're not building a tech company, but you do it. And you know how difficult and sort of emotionally draining it is, right? When you're looking at that balance sheet every month, you're going, man, how do I get this thing up? And you work harder and harder and harder. And, that feedback loop of working hard. And then there's the culture, which is the sort of the hustle culture now is the Elon Musk way, work all the time. And we're not built like that, right? And so what I've learned, and this is something that I'm tapering down to because I had my own run-ins with the physical limits of your body. Physically, my body started to hurt and break down because I was working so much. Is I'm learning to what I learned from Naval. He's the founder of AngelList. He's on Twitter at Naval. You should check him out. He's really awesome. But he says that you should work like a lion, right? And what that means is that you sit down and you plot and you plan and you strategize and then you explode and you do, right? So almost like you capture the game and then you have that and you do that again and again and again. And you can almost structure your week that way. You can structure your days that way. You can structure your months that way. You can structure your year that way, right? You can say from X amount of time to X amount of time, do my creative work. And then the hustle work can be done between these hours. And then from there, you taper down. And if you do that consistently, I think you're almost more productive because the truth is working long hours does not mean you're more productive. You just get stuff done. But I highly doubt that it moves the needle. It will move a needle, right? But in the long run, you're going to diminish certain parts of your life, like you just mentioned now, suffering from depression or anxiety and all that stuff. So I think that from the onset, you have to have what I would call your non-negotiables, right? Like one of my non-negotiables now is to not work past 10 o'clock. Now that might sound crazy. He's like, 10 o'clock is pretty late. Well, we're coming down from 1 a.m., right? So like now we get into 10 and we're going to keep coming down further and further to the point where I feel better. Because the truth is, if you don't feel good, you're not going to do great work.
Definitely.
You will
And
do work, but you won't do great work.
definitely. It's that quality piece, right? It's that
It's that
quality
quality
piece.
piece. It's that quality piece.
Exactly. And that's why you outsource, right? At the beginning, it's okay to bootstrap, all that stuff. But at some point down, you have to focus on what your bread and butter is and the bread and butter of the business as well, right? So there's this idea that the only way that you're a true entrepreneur is if you're going to bed at 2 a.m. And that is totally false. That's totally false. Like, I love going to bed at 10 o'clock, right? But see, the thing that I do, and this is a shout out to anyone that's listening, I practice what's called a miracle morning. Like, I try to get up, not try, I do get up at 5 a.m. and I run for about 30 minutes, come home, and then I read a book for probably about like another 30 minutes. And by that time, it's 6 o'clock, shower, head to work, right? And I need to do a better job at this, but I try to get to work, a few minutes early so I can sit and just meditate, focus, and visualize what are the goals that I want to accomplish today and affirm who I am. And that is something that you can Google, the miracle morning, right? It's something that can be very, very powerful, very powerful.
You know what's funny about what you just said is
Mm-hmm.
it's literally the simplest thing in the world. Combine that with a little bit of meditation and reading books, and you will literally be freaking unstoppable as a human being. But here's the kicker: 99% of people cannot do that. It's the simplest thing. It says you wake up in the morning, you take a minute, just a minute, right, to just practice some gratitude. What are you happy about? What are you grateful for? Then you get up, you put yourself through some either aerobic or anaerobic exercise, right, to wake your body up. Then you stretch, you have a healthy meal, you read, maybe, depending if you're religious or whatnot, you might read your Bible. If you're not, you might read a good book for half an hour. And then visualize your day, plan 3 or 4 things you want to get done for that day, and then start off your day. That's 2.5 hours. You do that, you can conquer the world, but people just can't do it.
Exactly, man.
I personally don't know why. I'm actively trying to do that every single day myself. It's the hardest thing to master, but if you get that right, man, you do anything in this planet.
Yeah, man. It's this idea that you can win the day as early, or you can win the day as early as possible, or as soon as you can, or before the competition even gets up. Like, you don't have to stay up till 2 a.m. You can go to bed at 10, get up, and still be just as productive. And that's something that I hope every entrepreneur, person in the tech space, whatever the case may be, really listens to.
Yeah, I think honestly, man, if you practice stuff like that and you're firing on all cylinders by 8 o'clock, I think your day can actively be done by 1.
Exactly.
No, seriously, you can be done by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and and that's it. The rest of the time, you can maybe go for a second run, go to the park, go to the library, read a book. To be honest with you, I don't even think people have enough energy to do more than 5 hours of creative work.
Yeah.
So working 10 hours, 12 hours a day, it's just bad habit, really.
It is. And there's a push in like other countries to test out this 30-hour work week. And hopefully we will get to that piece. And for me, I feel like that's why I'm pursuing my entrepreneurship. I just want to be able to, partially retire. I want to be able to spend time with family, friends, or, man, just going to the beach, man. As you mentioned, we do live in South Florida down here in like the Miami and Broward area. Like, there's so many
I don't
things
go to the beach enough, bro. We got to go to the beach, man. We got to have a beach day.
Definitely. The next BME event,
look, man, I'm not making any promises. It's like I said, man, I've really stripped off a lot of things in my life. And we spoke about this right before we got on. Was, you really have to. You think about, you got to be sharp, right? And I think to become sharp, become a knife edge at something, is you have to remove all the baggage. You might need to let go of some friends. You might need to change some habits. You might need to loosen up the commitments in your life. Because all these things just wear down. You're carrying up too much. You gotta lean your life down, spend less money, save more. Like, everything is just gotta be just enough. right? And from that point on, you're able to have enough brain power to actually go on and actually build something awesome. And I think that's something that I've had to do. And that's why I look at BME and I'm like, okay, this is awesome, bringing people together in the real life space, but I can't do it all. And that's unfortunately is one of those things that might have to take a backseat for now.
And that's okay, man. That's okay. It leads you to be sharper, as you mentioned, for
Yeah.
other things that you're trying to accomplish. So, man, don't even sweat it, man. Man, we're about to wrap up pretty soon, but there's something that you mentioned like back earlier in the show, and it's the accelerator that you joined through Mozilla.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to kind of elaborate on like how could someone who is creating a tech startup, join something like that. It doesn't have to be. Well, let's use Mozilla as your example. I know there's
Right.
other accelerators out
Yeah.
there, but let's just talk about Mozilla.
Yeah. So you really just apply. It's really that simple. You go to the website of whatever accelerator you find and you apply. I think what's important is that the idea is compelling, the story is compelling, and you don't always have to have a MVP or early product that you've built, but it's worth having something, right? Something to show for it. You really just apply. And it's not like people draw, sticks out of a hat. They look at everybody, you get interviewed, and if you get in, then that's it. It's just time to work. So,
Okay.
I mean, I can probably send you a bunch of different resources that you can share in the show notes or something.
Will do.
But yeah, you really just apply to these things, man. And if you get in, you just work on your product and meet other founders. It's honestly really that simple.
Gotcha. And to clarify, an accelerator is something that's going to take your idea of something that's in the early stages and bring you to this full form, basically,
Right. So
correct?
like we're all chasing what's called product market fit, where sort of the world knows what your product does. You find a set of users that really enjoy this product, and it's actually solving this pain point. And the idea is that once you get into the accelerators, it's supposed to move you in that direction to discover what this true product is. Because most likely, the first product you build is not going to solve the problem. So it's going to teach you to iterate. It's going to teach you. People are going to, you're going to have some mentors to guide you through the process. And I think that's the true value is having the mentors, having the space to share ideas with other people similar to you, and also be accountable with a time limit. So you only have X amount of time to get to this point. Obviously, the company still lives afterwards, but it'd be great if you can figure things out during that process.
Gotcha. Awesome. So for everyone that's listening, what would be one thing you would suggest for those that are looking to create a tech startup?
Yeah, so this one's pretty easy. Um, be curious, and no matter what you're interested in life, right? Or what draws your attention and where your passion is, there's a business there. So it might not necessarily be a pure tech startup. It could be tech enabled, which is businesses that are coupled with partially technology, partial in the real world. But whatever the case may be, follow your interests. And if you follow your interests, you would always be in a space where you'll notice things that need to be fixed. Um, Whatever your interest is, if you're in music, you can think about like there's a million problems with music, right? Like
Hmm.
copyright rights, there's events, how to engage fans. I mean, there's so much. And if you allow yourself to get deep into your interests, you will always find something there, right? And as long as you're visible and you look out for problems that you face personally, that's like the number one thing. If you encounter that problem yourself, boom, perfect. So I would always say if you don't have ideas for things, just follow your interests, right? If you love to read, keep reading, join a book club, right? Go on book fairs, go book shopping. And just by doing all of that, you realize that, oh shit, maybe I can't find this type of book in this city. Interesting. I wonder why. Let me dig a little deeper. Or it turns out that the book supplier doesn't supply the East Coast. I wonder why. And you research and be like, oh shit, there's like no way to get the books here because maybe there's some weird law that they must be printed only on the West Coast. And you're like, well, why don't we print them on the East Coast and I'll be the supplier? So you always like dive deeper. And I guess what may always seem like trivial problems underneath it. I mean, you spoke about Airbnb. Sound like a trivial problem, right? turned out to be $1 trillion market. Like YouTube, right? The guy just wanted to, send videos over to, I believe, his girlfriend in Taiwan or something. Very trivial, $1 billion market. So, really follow your interests, however weird they are. When I think about what I'm doing, for example, community, a voice-based community platform, it's like, how big is that going to be? I guess we don't know. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, it could be trivial, but hey,
It
as you
sounds
mentioned,
it sounds trivial, but it could touch a lot of people.
exactly, man. That's dope, man. Adrian, I definitely appreciate you stopping by. We're gonna wrap up here, but before we do, I always like for my guests to give any tips, strategies, whether it be resources on the internet, books, apps, so on and so forth. Can you kind of give the listeners some things that they can check out to help them with their tech startup or even just entrepreneurship in general?
Wow, man, there's so much here.
Don't be shy. You can rattle them off.
So I would say, oh, man, this is tough. Let's go with books. Um, I will read 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, who's the founder of, I believe, PayPal and Palantir, which is like the most secretive startup you've never heard of.
I invested in Palantir.
Oh,
Yeah.
you did? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, they did a super secret IPO.
Mhm.
So 0 to 1 is a good one. Let me think. Start with Why. It's a really amazing book. Can't remember the author's name, but Start with Why. Um, in terms of like communities, I think this is the important part. If you want to break through and sort of find founders, there's a couple of sites you can check out. I would check out indiehackers.com, and it's really a community of hackers, basically, software developers who are building stuff, and it's really awesome because you see all the new technology being built way before it hits like the mainstream. That's a good one. There's a bunch of Slack communities to get involved with. I would say podcasts. I listen to Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman.
Mhm.
Amazing podcast, amazing production. It's really awesome. I listened to This Week in Startup by Jason Calacanis, I believe. Amazing startup. You're gonna and these what I'm trying to do is give readers, I mean, sorry, your listeners an entry point, right, into the bubble almost, right? And because if you tap into these entry points, right, you discover everything else that you need to know, right? Like if you're on Twitter, you can follow Naval, you can follow Jason himself. You can follow me. But so I think that there's a whole bunch of things. Maybe I'll send you like a list of stuff as well. Maybe some more books and websites and things like that. But really, I would say, um, really just put yourself out there. I think reading is amazing. I would say read the right books, tune into the right podcasts, and the rest will sort of just find itself very slowly.
Yeah, very rarely can you get a glimpse into a millionaire's or billionaire's mind, and through books is a way that I see that you can do that. There's nothing else that you can do to kind of get a glimpse into what Jeff Bezos, right, and all these other guys, Elon Musk, whoever, and even the people that you mentioned. There's only a few ways that you can get a glimpse to what they're thinking, and unfortunately, it's through books, man. So,
No, honestly, that's why I like podcasts so much, right? Because
mhm,
books are a little scripted at the end of the day, right? They have to go through publishers, they have to be revised. Podcasts, we just ripping, right? If this was a blog
very
post,
true.
I would probably not say 50% of the stuff that I just said, right? Because I would think about, does this sound great? Does this make me look smart? Is this the
Hmm.
right language? But on podcasts, we just rip. I'm just like from the top, I just say what I'm thinking. So I would urge you to tune into podcasts as much as you can. It's a great way to get into the minds of people doing amazing things. But the last thing I want to add there, man, and I think
Hmm.
that if you don't have the right mentors around you, like it's okay to idolize people and figure out what they know, right? Like listen, I mean, like I have certain people that I listen to and I listen to them very keenly, what they say, how they say it. what they're truly thinking. You almost like you want to get into their minds a little bit and get that. You would always find that superpower, right? If you listen hard enough. And once you find that, you can almost like take that for yourself, right? You can get it through books, but I think that podcasts there's something special happening here with podcasts, man.
Mhm.
Um, you listen to the right people for long enough, you will get the best parts of them and use it in your life.
Definitely, definitely. And speaking of podcasts and everything else, can you tell the listeners where they can find your podcast and also where they can find your Instagram, contact you, all that good stuff?
Right. So I keep it super simple. If you go to adriancole.co, everything is there. Links to my podcast, links to my social networks. But if you're on Instagram, I think I'm Adrian C. Cole on Instagram. Twitter, I'm the other Cole. That's another story that we'll get to some other time. But yeah, no, the real very easy, adriancole.co. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email. My email is on there. Social links is on there. And if you want to do tune into the Grit and Grind show, um, search for Grit and Grind on wherever you get your podcasts. If you don't find Grit and Grind, type in Grit and Grind Adrian and you'll find me. And if you're a founder tuning in and you want to get on the show, reach out. And if you know somebody you would like for me to interview, again, just let me know.
Definitely. Thank you. I appreciate you stopping by the show. Man, I feel like you dropped so many gems. I myself will go back and listen to it. So for everyone that's listening, please be sure check out those resources, check out Adrian's page, all that good stuff. And thank you for checking out the podcast where therapy helps everyone. And Adrian, thank you for helping us to see how therapy, but not only just therapy, but mental health and emotion, psychology, and everything helps people in tech startups and in the entrepreneur space. So thank you.
Last thing I would say is sleep fixes everything.
Yes, yes. Make
Just
sure you
sleep,
get that sleep.
sleep,
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah. There's a myth about staying up to 2 a.m. It is what it is, a myth.
Get to sleep, people. Till next time.
Thank you. Thank you.